Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody again to another Less Stress Parenting episode, trying to bring wonderful professionals in the DC metro area and the greater Houston area for wonderful information at a time that you need it most. And so happy to welcome Shannon Callahan from DC College Counseling. I know the college admission process in particular has evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years. There's been quite a few changes. Some of them may be here to stay. Some of them may have been temporary. Some of them may have been announced as temporary and really be here to stay. And so we're very, very pleased to have Shannon Callahan with us from DC College Counseling. And I will let her do a better job of introducing herself and her background and the wonderful work that she does. But welcome everyone, and we hope you enjoy. As long as time permits, we will have a Q&A towards the end. So please hang in there for that. And Shannon, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan and Wendy, for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to talk with you guys about the college process in general. Happy to address some of the COVID changes. As Evan mentioned, there's really a lot that's been going on lately. So would love to hear your questions in the chat or the Q&A. Yes, and I see Wendy's question to please share the grade of your child. That would be super helpful for me to sort of understand where everybody's at in this process, because I know, we may have some seniors who are right in the middle of sort of the active stage of the process, and we may have, freshmen or sophomores who are just kind of getting their feet wet and wanting to understand a little bit more about this process. So as Evan said, I'm Shannon. I got my bachelor's degree from William and Mary here in Virginia, where I'm based, and my master's degree from Boston College. I've worked on both sides of the desk. I was in admissions at Georgetown Law prior to coming to DC College Counseling, and I've also taught undergraduates at the college level as well. So really excited to kind of talk with you guys more about this. Okay, senior, 11th grade, freshman, junior, freshman, junior, senior. All right, we've got a whole range. So hopefully everybody finds something that's helpful for you where you're at today. So some of the things that I think have been the biggest topics of interest that I have seen this year in particular, but also sort of generally are, building a college list, evaluating schools, that first step of where do I apply? How do I know if a school is good or not beyond, the rankings that I see in US News? How do I know if it's a good fit for my student? What are the mistakes that come up? Am I doing something wrong? Is there something that I'm not paying attention to or understanding? And I think under that heading also comes a lot of these changes, since a lot of parents were doing this process or were last involved, especially if this is your first student that's applying to college. The process can look really different, COVID or no COVID, to be honest. And then writing the essay and sort of what comes with the essay piece of the process. So I'm going to kind of try to talk through those three topics, and then I'm happy to open it up to questions if there are other things that are really of concern to you guys. So starting with the criteria for evaluating schools. Personally, we are not huge fans of the US News and World Report. It's not really going to tell you much about an undergraduate program. If you're looking at a graduate degree or a law degree or a business degree, maybe it'll tell you a little bit more. For an undergraduate degree, there are lots of things that go into those rankings that don't necessarily have a lot of bearing on your student's education. Something like how many books are in the library. It's great if there's a lot of books in the library. As an undergraduate, your student's probably not searching for rare library books. That's not going to be important to them. So what I want to point to are some of these questions on the screen that students can sort of be asking themselves as they start the process. So what are your values, and what factors are most important to you? And then looking at the balance of the list. So one of the things that I think causes a lot of stress in this process, and I hear it from students all the time, is I'm not going to have any options. What if I don't have anywhere to go? Or what if I have to go to XYZ, my safety school that I'm not at all interested in? And having a balanced list with lots of different options that you genuinely enjoy, I think, is one of the biggest ways to decrease stress in this process, because then okay, I do have options. I have a lot of options, and I would be excited to attend a lot of these schools. So sort of stepping away from that selectivity in US News as the only ranking and broadening your search a little bit, I think can be really helpful. So talking about the values piece of it, some things that we like to ask students at the beginning, you know, what is your happy place? How do you like to spend your free time, right? Just trying to get a sense from the student of what they're really interested in, where they like to be. Sometimes their happy place is the beach. Sometimes it's the golf course. Sometimes they're like, it's at home in my room, talking to my friends. So I think that figuring out what those values are can be a helpful starting point in terms of building a list. We also look at things like, what's your dream job? And I'll talk a little bit more about specializing, but I think now with your freshmen and sophomores and juniors and seniors, you know, any age of your student, they should be starting to think about, what are my goals? Where am I going to specialize? And that's not to say, you know, they have to decide on their whole career right now at age 14 or 15, but that we want to see them start to think, okay, how is college going to help me get to where I want to go? And that is a factor in choosing the list. And then any particular skills or talents, you know, getting a sense of who the student is, I think is the first step to building a list. Then you want to start thinking about what factors are most important to you. And what I want to stress here is that your factors may not be the same as someone else's. Your factors may not have anything to do with the number of books in the library, or it may be really important to your student to be within an hour's drive of home, or really they want to be much further than that from home, which sometimes causes tension. But I think, you know, if the most important thing for your student is not the most important thing for their friend or your friend's student, that's okay. I think this really is about weighing the factors that matter to you, to your family, and to your student. And kind of going along with that, I think that, oh, sorry, I guess my slide's not moving forward. There we go. Is talking about what's economically viable. So this, I think, is a conversation that can cause a lot of stress for parents. And it's one that I encourage you to have with your student as soon as possible. It can be difficult to have these type of financial conversations with students, but they need to have this conversation with you to avoid being disappointed or being confused further down the line when they realize that their dream school is just not an economically viable option. I have a note on here about the expected family contribution, which is actually changing this year. So once we start to see new calculators become available, you can find an online calculator to see what your family will likely be expected to pay for college. And then you can let that number inform the conversation that you're having about the college list and sort of how you plan to fund your student's education. And I think, again, it's just really important to have the student in the loop on what this looks like. I think having everybody on the same page early is going to eliminate a lot of stress in the process for the family, for everybody. So that's definitely an important factor, as important, if not more so, than the values piece of building a list. And then the last thing that I want to mention in terms of list building is about your list balance. So these are sort of the way we categorize schools for our students: likely or safety, more commonly you may have heard, possible or target, reach, and then a dream reach. So a likely school is a school that you're fairly likely to be admitted to. But again, I think what I want to stress here is a lot of students will throw in a likely school, throw in a safety school, say, oh, that's just my safety, without doing research into the school or without, you know, looking into other options. And that contributes a lot to that feeling of stress and feeling trapped and feeling like I don't have any options. I really don't want to go there. That might turn into the only place that I can go. And that's not what we want. So we want to find schools that are less selective, that still students love, that still provide them a great education. And those schools are out there. So doing a little more research up front, I think, can minimize a lot of stress later in the process for those likely and target schools. And we try to have maybe 5 to 6 schools in those categories before sort of building on those reach and dream reach schools. So we've got 2 or 3 likelies, 2 or 3 targets, then maybe you start looking at some reaches. And then dream reach, you know, that's going to be a highly selective school. I always like to tell people, you know, there are more valedictorians in the United States than there are spots in the freshman class at Princeton. That's a reach for everybody. It doesn't matter who your student is, Princeton's a reach, or Stanford or Yale or whatever it is. So adding on those sort of dream reaches, those highly, highly selective schools, is only going to happen once we have a really good foundation for the list. So thinking about these categories, and the other thing that can help when you're doing this are if your school uses a service like Naviance that has scattergrams, your student should be able to show you, what the admission statistics look like for that school. If no student from their high school has been admitted to Cornell in the last 8 years, then okay, this is going to be a serious dream reach for my student. Okay, so common mistakes. I think that these are sort of the things that I hear the most that can really have a negative impact on application that parents may not always realize are even a mistake. So admissions committees are looking for well-rounded students. I think for a lot of you, this probably was true during your college process. You may have heard, you've got to volunteer, and you've got to play a sport, and you've got to play an instrument, and do all of these different activities. And I still get that question a lot from parents who, they're starting with their freshman or sophomore, and they're saying, does my kid have to play a sport? He doesn't play a musical instrument, or he doesn't volunteer at the food drive enough. Should he be doing that more? And the answer is really that that's not what the admissions committee is looking for anymore. So instead, you should think about your student, or the student should think about themselves as a specialist. If you've got a kid who loves STEM subjects, who loves math, who really thrives in that area, that's a student that should be joining the math team. Maybe their volunteer work is tutoring other students in math. They should be doing activities that sort of illustrate, this is my specialty. I like to say, when the admissions officer presents an application, they should be able to do in a couple sentences. Oh, this is that math kid who swims. That's an easy sell. This is that kid who does, he did swimming, but then he did lacrosse, and he does pretty well in all of his classes, but he hasn't really done any enrichment in any of them. That kid's a lot harder sell. So I would think, talk with your student now, what do you like? What do they want to do? What's their dream job, right? Where do they think they're headed? And then how can you help them have extracurriculars and summer experiences that fit in with that specialty, with that profile? The admissions committee is too busy to notice. I think this applies to a lot of things. The admissions committee is too busy to look at my Facebook. They're not going to click on my Instagram. The admissions committee is too busy to notice that I said I did lacrosse 40 hours a week on my application. They're not going to pay attention to that. They don't know if I came to an info session. I think that really, it's not safe to assume that an admissions officer is not going to notice something in the process. So reading things over, doing your homework, making sure absolutely certain that all the information you present is accurate is going to be really important, because the admissions officer may well call your guidance counselor and say, Sally said that she did lacrosse 40 hours a week. Is that accurate? And they're going to have to report that back. Or they may well go on your Facebook or your Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is and try to learn something about you from that. It is possible. So I highly recommend, cleaning up the social media, cleaning up the application. Don't assume that they're so buried in applications that they're not seeing these things, I think is another mistake to look out for. And then the last one that I really wanted to talk about is prepping your recommenders. So lots of students think, I'm just going to ask my teacher for a recommendation. They know me. Or maybe they'll ask for my resume. I'll give them my resume. That's fine. It's going to be the same one for all of the teachers I ask, 2, maybe 3 teachers. They're all going to get my resume. The problem with that is then you get 2 teacher letters that say pretty much the exact same thing, because all they know about you is your resume. So giving specific information to the recommenders, writing it down, saying to them, hey, I really want you to write me a recommendation, and here's why. I did that great presentation in your class. I always help other students in your class. I've served as a tutor for you, reminding them of what you've done specifically that they can write about, and making sure that all of your recommenders have different information so that all of your letters aren't just sort of a generic letter, says the same thing. Johnny's really great. You should admit him. Every single letter is going to say that, hopefully. hopefully you're picking recommenders that are enthusiastic about writing for you. They're going to say great things. What we want them to say are these specifics about your time in their class. So those, I think, are sort of the three things that can be pretty common to try at the start of the process that can end up really being a challenge moving forward. And then I think another way to really, really cut down on your stress is going to be to stay organized throughout the process. That means creating a master list, especially, if you have multiple people helping your student with the process. Maybe you have an Illuminos coach who's keeping them on track. Maybe you're working with somebody like us, an independent consultant. Maybe you're just working with a school counselor. Maybe it's just you and your student, but you still want to both be able to look at this list. So we use Asana in our office. I think that software is really great. You could use something like Trello. There are other sort of ways to hold on to a list that are free to use on the internet. But even if you just use Google Sheets, I think that can be really helpful to sort of have a list where you're keeping track of all of the deadlines and all the required materials. And the reason I say Google Sheets is because it can be shared and edited in real time. So if your student, checks something off, you'll know immediately, oh, okay, they wrote their personal statement for whatever school. And then you can sort of follow along together. Secondly, planning to submit early. So with our seniors, we're submitting right now. We have, the students who start with us as juniors, they submit their applications in September. So they're getting that done now. But even if you are a senior now and you're going, oh my gosh, I'm totally not ready to submit my applications, that's okay. I would still think about, 2 weeks out from the deadline being your very latest time. A deadline where it might matter a little bit more is something like rolling admissions. So if you have a school that's reading applications as they come in, you want to do that as soon as possible. But planning to submit early, number one way to avoid major stress when you're feeling like, okay, I'm coming up on the deadline and I'm not ready. So taking advantage of this time in the fall to really get those applications ready. I don't want anyone scrambling over the Christmas break. I also think, if you realize that you do want some help over the Christmas break, places are closed, people are busy, it's better, much better to get this started now, plan to submit early, give yourself plenty of buffer when it comes to your timeline. And then take advantage of resources. So obviously, Illuminos, we are a paid resource, when it comes to test prep, when it comes to strategy, but there are also plenty of free and low cost resources out there that you can take advantage of. So some of my favorites are Khan Academy, which is an online platform. They have a course on applying to college that can walk you through a lot of these steps. UVisit, which is really been a lifesaver during COVID. It is sort of an online tour. If you have seniors, they may have done tours like this already, where they can just sort of walk around the campus virtually. The Princeton Review site, that's just review.com. I think is really helpful. It does require that you sign up for an account there, but it is free. So you just sign up for an account and then you have access. And what I really like about the Princeton Review site is that they do have student feedback. So they have like what students say sections for academics and for student life. And so you can really see reviews from students, which can be really helpful. Again, especially during COVID, if you're watching an admissions presentation for the 5th time, they can start to run together. They can start to feel like they're all the same. And getting that feedback from students, I think, can really help differentiate between those different schools if everything's sort of blurring together in your online research. And then there's the FISC guide, which I actually have right over here. Again, what I really like about the FISC guide book, which is a paid resource, you can buy it, although you can also ask your school counselor. They might have a copy, or a library, local library may have a copy. It's written like a narrative, so it's not like a chart, which can feel overwhelming. And also, doesn't, okay, this school has 5,000 or 10,000 students. I kind of know what that feels like, but for a student, they really might not know what that feels like. I had a student come to me for brainstorming saying, I really want to go to a large school. And I said, okay, like how big are we talking? And he said, like 2,000 people. And I was like, okay, that's actually a really small school. So I think that the feel is important. And that's why I like Princeton Review and the FIS Guide, because they're sort of more narrative and you can figure out a little bit more about the campus. And the FIS Guide also has cross-referenced lists, which is nice. So if you go visit, NYU and you love NYU, you can flip to the NYU page and say, okay, kids who love NYU also love USC. Maybe I should also look there, and kind of build your list that way. We're really lucky, at least here in Virginia in the DC area. And I know some of you are coming in from elsewhere, but you may have colleges around you that can sort of show you what you like and don't like. So for instance, here in DC, GW, that's an urban university. It's right in the city. Georgetown, a little bit separated. You see those two, you know which one you like better. Then all of a sudden, BU versus Boston College and NYU versus Columbia and all of these other schools that sort of have those same relationships. So those are some resources that I think can definitely be really helpful as you're moving through the process. And again, just not being afraid to ask for help is something that certainly can eliminate a lot of stress. So on to the most stressful part of the process for a lot of students, especially, which is writing the essays. So these are kind of our step-by-step to brainstorming for that main common application essay. So for those of you who aren't quite in this process yet, the common application is where students apply to most schools. There are other applications like the coalition or school-specific applications. Most students use the common application for at least many of their schools. And the common application has one main essay that goes to nearly every school you apply to. That's the most important one. Then, of course, they have these supplemental essays. They tack on a lot of writing. But when you're writing that main essay, we really encourage you to start with an appealing characteristic about yourself. So this is for students, and you as parents, this is key to help them with, because you ask a high school junior or senior, how would people describe you? And a lot of times they're totally at a loss. And you're the number one person who knows how caring your student is and how dedicated they are and what a good friend they are and what a great sense of humor they have. And you are the person who can really help them and say, your application wouldn't be complete if they didn't realize what a caring person you are. That is, so central to who you are. And we need to show that. So you can be super helpful to them at this stage of identifying what the admissions committee is not going to know about them. Because at this point where they're reading the essay, they know their extracurriculars, they know their grades, they know they're smart, but they don't know their personality. And that's what we're trying to do. Starting with the characteristic and then moving on to a story is a really key part of the process, because it lets you sort of shape the story around something about the student. If you start with a story, you're likely not going to get enough of the student in it. You don't, a student who writes about how much they admire their grandfather, say. If they start with that story, what you usually get is an essay about the grandfather. And the grandfather sounds great, but you don't know anything about the student. And so starting with the characteristic and then saying, okay, how can we show your nurturing personality? Or how can we show your dedication? What's a story from your life that really exemplifies this characteristic that you have? And the third step would be to think about how that characteristic has played out in the past and how it will help you in the future. So, for instance, I have this really caring nature. I realized it for the first time when I was volunteering at the animal shelter, and now I want to be an elementary school teacher. I'm applying for education, and that nurturing quality that I have is going to help me in the future. That's kind of the reflection that's happening in this third step. So that would be sort of the way to come to what the story looks like. Again, always starting with characteristic, not picking the story first. Uncommon connections. So that's like things that don't seem cliche, maybe how you used the same characteristic that you used to volunteer at the animal shelter also helped you on the wrestling team, right? Things that the admissions committee may not immediately think of. just make an essay more interesting. This is not an essay for an English class or a legal brief. This, I think, can trip up a lot of students and parents. This is an essay that has a genre that is totally different from anything the students probably written before. So it can be a little more conversational than an English class essay. It should have a little more personality. It's okay to joke or to use exclamation points in this essay. We call the essays 17-year-old perfect, meaning like we want them to be perfect, but we don't want them to sound like an adult wrote them, which goes into the next point, which is parents try to stay away from the draft of the essay. Yes, you can be very helpful in picking the characteristic, and yes, you certainly can read over the essay at the end and offer feedback, but coming in the middle and imposing your voice, more often than not, when that does happen, we read an essay that an admissions committee is going to know this is the voice of a 40-year-old. This is not the voice of a 17-year-old. And they're primed to look out for that. So if you can, if your student is self-motivated enough to draft on their own, I really encourage you to sort of let the drafting process happen with them, and then you jump in with edits at the end. And then supplemental essays. So that's sort of the main essay. Those are the major tips. Supplemental essays. These, again, major source of stress for sure. We have students writing, somewhere around 40 essays a year typically for all these different schools. I just have some thoughts here on some common topics. So many schools will ask students to elaborate on an extracurricular activity. Many will ask them to talk about a community or an organization that they're a part of, a particular perspective they've developed from their family or background, what you might call a diversity essay. Why do you want to study what you want to study? This kind of goes back to our specializing, right? We really want the student to have a clear idea. This is what I want to study, and here's my experience that backs that up. And then, of course, the big question, why us? Making sure you're doing your research into the school and you're able to write an essay that really clearly articulates, this is why I want to attend that school. And some schools, have certain things that they're really proud of, that are really important to them, that are really unique programs at that institution, and you want to make sure you're mentioning those things. So if you can read a Why Us essay and copy and paste most of it to all of your schools, that's not the right essay. This one really does require that research. But for the rest of them, if you are a parent of a junior who's a little bit younger, who's not quite starting the process yet, these are things that they can start to think about this year, what they might say for each of these supplemental essays. However, I would nail down the story for the main essay first, because like I said, that's really gonna be the most important thing. Then you move on to some of these supplemental essays, and these are some of the topics that you're probably gonna see. So question about the essay: should the main essay be about a tragedy such as the death of a parent, or is that considered negative? So short answer, yes, it could be about something like that. I think that the mistake that comes up a lot here is that students feel like they have to have had a major tragedy. And you get students coming out and say, nothing's happened to me. I haven't done anything. I don't have, the hardships. I can't tell this tragic story. And it certainly does not need to be about a tragedy to be an interesting essay. So an essay about the death of a parent, let's look at this, right? That could be a really good essay or a really bad essay. The first thing I would want to make sure is that this happened a long time ago and the student's prepared to write about it. I would not advise writing about a tragedy that happened in the last few weeks. It's way too raw. It's going to be really difficult to talk about for the student and for whoever is helping them with the essay. If there's enough distance that the student feels able to write about it, here's a bad essay about the death of a parent. I finished reading it. I feel obviously sympathy for the student. I feel that I know the parent, wow, his mom sounded amazing. I wish she could have come to Yale. But I don't know anything about this kid. This is more like a eulogy than a college essay. Or I read this essay about the death of a parent and I read about how this kid jumped in and started cooking dinner for his younger siblings while his family was grieving. And I read about how, he had to write a eulogy for his mom and he didn't know what to say, but he eventually powered through and he was able to give a speech that brought comfort to his family. Now I'm seeing the nurturing in this kid and I'm seeing his resilience and I'm learning about him. And that's really why I think it's key to start with a quality rather than with a story, because the quality is what really matters. What the kid is like is what really matters. And the good news is that even if you or your kid are sitting there going, nothing's ever happened to me, I've never had a big event like that in my life, you still have little events where you can demonstrate how these characteristics came through. It could be something, as simple as, I cooked a meal for my family. I cooked a dish that took hours to cook. I learned to be patient and wait. And here's how I've used my patience in the rest of my life. And I'll continue to be patient and deliberate in college. That's a great story. That could be an excellent essay. And all you did was cook dinner, right? So it could be a tragedy. I would, again, be careful if it's too recent and too raw. It doesn't have to be, certainly doesn't have to be. So I hope, Donna, that answers your question. Okay, I will switch to talk a little bit about timeline. So Jen, you asked, what advice do you have for a younger student who aspires to be accepted in an Ivy League university? How young should you begin thinking about the college planning process? Awesome question. The age that I really like for students to start, when we work with students, we love seeing them come to us around 8th grade, 9th grade. Don't panic. I know it sounds young. Some of you are like, my kid is a senior and I haven't thought about this. The reason that I like to see that 8th grader or 9th grader is because we can really help you plan out your course schedule. What are you taking? What is it going to look like? Do I need to take 4 years of foreign language in high school? Really? Yes, you really do. You really do. Keep that in mind. We can look at your extracurriculars. What are you interested in? Could we get a leadership position in here? Could we join this club? And we have more time to build that resume. When you come to us as a junior, we absolutely can help you through the active stage of the process, the actual applying, but a lot of your resume, your grades, your GPA, those are set in stone. So my advice for a younger student, for that 8th or 9th grader, would be, again, to spend high school thinking of yourself as an expert, as a specialist. I already said math. I love business. I'm going to join DECA or a business club. I'm going to start my own babysitting business and do my business cards and market myself. I'm going to start an Etsy store. I'm going to take an entrepreneurship class online, free class through a service like Coursera. I'm going to work with a company like Illuminos to really get my executive functioning skills in order and to really excel at my business courses, right? Whatever it is. I am going to sort of think of myself as a specialist in this area. That's what I think you should be doing in high school. Figure out what you love genuinely. It doesn't have to be business if your kid has no interest in business. What they really love to do, and then how they can do that in depth and across different activities and in the summertime and wherever else. So that would be, I think, my biggest piece of advice, Jen, for a younger student, would be to begin thinking about this at the beginning of high school and to really begin thinking about specializing, and to take 4 years of foreign language. That always really bums out parents who come in and go, my kid hates Spanish. Does he really have to take it all 4 years? Yes, he really should take it all 4 years. Okay, so when it comes to the older students, I know a lot of you have juniors and seniors. I want to talk a little bit through our timeline. So application timeline, if you're a junior in the fall, right now, you're thinking about your specialty, potentially adding activities to your resume. You're beginning that list building that we talked about at the start, thinking about a balanced list, doing your brainstorming, thinking about your values, planning some visits, using Christmas break or any fall breaks, Thanksgiving, if you're visiting in person, or doing online visits. maybe using Princeton Review or UVisit. You can also, and I don't think a lot of juniors know this, create a common application account now and begin filling out the application, the initial pieces of it. So not all of it, because it will roll over. It always rolls over on August 1, but we have our students complete the initial pieces of the application in the fall, including their activities. Then later on, you are demonstrating your interest, meeting with admissions counselors, researching, continuing your list, pursuing test prep. We generally recommend taking the test 3 times. You could do more, you could do less. And that's something that you would really want to talk with Illuminos or whoever is helping you with test prep about what's achievable for the student. And then winter and spring, identifying summer plans and course selection. Again, that's something that we would do with students every year. So freshmen, sophomores, everybody can think about that. What's happening over the summer? What classes am I taking? How are they reflecting my specialty? January is also typically when you can begin to work on the main essay and keep continuing with your test prep. Also in the spring of junior year, you'll be requesting letters of recommendation. You'll be applying for those summer programs that you've identified. And you'll also begin working on the supplemental essays after the main common application essay. And we really recommend, if you have a junior or younger right now, that this is also the time you're finishing up your testing. So you're figuring out your baseline. You know, if you're a sophomore, this spring and summer, really good time to figure out your baseline. And I know Illuminos has a test that can help you do that. And then you're working on the prep sort of throughout junior year. And ideally it's finished by the spring, if not earlier. So that's kind of what this year looks like for juniors. For seniors, you're in a little bit of a compressed timeline. So if you intend to take the SAT or ACT and you haven't already, or your student hasn't already, do it now. It is optional for most schools this year. Major exceptions include the Florida system, which it was never optional for the Florida system. The Georgia system, so University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, that's also gone back to requiring tests this cycle. And then Georgetown, for those in the DC area, Georgetown is back to requiring tests. But most schools will allow you to apply test optional this year. Asking for recommendations if you have not already, and prepping your recommenders, as we talked about, which is more than just handing them the resume. Begin with the pre-writing for the common application essay. So that's figuring out your characteristic, brainstorming the story you want to tell. You're working with the student to help them do that. And then filling out FAFSA and applying for scholarships. If that's something that you need to do, should be something that you're focusing on now. November, again, demonstrating interest, doing research. If admissions counselors are coming to your high school, which a lot of times is true for juniors and seniors, going to sessions of schools you're interested in to really show your interest. Completing your essays, making sure that you have somebody review them, whether you're reviewing them as the parent or you're having somebody else read through them. And then a lot of your early application deadlines will be in November. So October 15th is some early application deadlines. Most will be November 1st. You'll also have a November 15th sort of deadline as well. And then December, you should just be compiling your materials. Potentially you're starting interview prep in the fall or winter of your senior year as well. Then in the spring, you've got applications due, getting your decisions in March and April, and then submitting your deposit and enrolling. So that is sort of the general timeline. So now to questions, and please put them in the chat if you have them. And I saw a couple come in about, what if your student doesn't know what they want to specialize in? Any tips on helping a younger kid hone in on a specialty? And so Cheryl said, I'm kind of stunned to think kids this young should have this set already. And I want to emphasize, it does not have to be set. It can change and evolve, certainly. I don't think that a kid who says, you know, I want to be an entrepreneur at age 14 is going to really be an entrepreneur when they graduate from college. That's not what I'm saying. However, it is important to the application that the kid has a clear profile. It can change most schools as soon as you get there. at a traditional liberal arts school, you can say, I'm going to major in math and show up and major in English. Nobody's going to say anything. So this is not set in stone. They should not have it set already. They should be thinking about it. And, I think helping a kid hone in on a specialty, or what if they don't know what they want to do? For a younger student, like an 8th or 9th grader, I think that's okay. They should try stuff out. Encourage them to join clubs that interest them. Encourage them to do activities that jump out to them, and let them sort of figure out, okay, I really enjoyed that volunteer tutoring. I think I want to volunteer at a daycare center or a after school care center, or I want to keep doing this work with children. That was really something that I enjoyed freshman year. I'm going to pursue it. So letting that sort of come naturally. And again, I honestly think that this way, in addition to being better for the application process, is actually better for the kid. Because I think, 30 years ago, you had, okay, you got to play an instrument even if you hate it, and you have to play a sport even if you hate it, and you have to do all these different things. And now you can tell a kid, if you love robotics, do robotics, and teach young kids how to do robotics, and take robotics class at school if it's offered or an elective, or take a class in engineering and do a robotics program over the summer. And that kid really gets to sort of immerse themselves in what they love. And that, I think, is really key. So I hope that that's, Robin and Cheryl, that's helpful in terms of how you're sort of choosing that specialty for a younger student. Really, it's the student that's choosing the specialty. And if an older student is, looking at their resume and saying, this doesn't seem to fit together, I think looking for a connective thread. So this all could come under the heading of, working with people, psychology or marketing or whatever it is, that can really be the angle for the application. And that's actually, for us, that's the first thing we do with our juniors. A lot of them have already done it in September. We sit down, we look at their activities, what they've done, and then we say, okay, where's the angle for the application? That's really our first step. Okay, good. I'm glad that was helpful. Do schools look more favorably on students who have attended one of their summer programs or any college summer experience / study program? I think it's great to attend the program for a school that you're interested in. Schools certainly do not expect that you will have attended their summer program. Attending a summer program at, a highly regarded school near you, or one that offers something you're interested in, you won't be penalized by the school for not attending their program. I think summer experience is certainly important, especially in high school. I want students to have at least some time in the summer spent with a summer experience, but it could be, it could be a study program at a college. It could be an internship. It could be a summer lifeguarding at the pool. We had a student this year write an amazing essay about the summer she spent lifeguarding at the pool. So it doesn't have to be, again, this amazing, my dream school, and I went to their summer program and did all this amazing work. But it should be something that the student is interested in. It should be a structured activity. So not just, I was hanging out at home and at the beach all summer. I was doing something that we can sort of talk about on the application. But it certainly doesn't have to be summer program specific to the college.
So Shannon, let me jump in and just ask you a question, because I think this is a really big topic around here. And a lot of kids, for example, will look at NYU or USC or some of those top tier schools where they offer summer programs for high school students, for example, in film. That's a big one. And they take the course and they get an A and they get their 4 credits for the college. To flip what you're saying sort of on its head, does that help you get into that school if you're, for example, applying to the film school at NYU?
So film, I think, is actually pretty particular. So for film specifically, yes. And the reason is because NYU film will actually ask you, have you attended these programs? It's their program. It's the New York Film Academy program, which if you are interested in film and here, definitely check out the New York Film Academy. They started doing virtual programs during COVID. It's extremely highly regarded by film schools. And I think there's one other program. And NYU says, have you done these programs in film on their application? So that in particular is important. Generally, I don't think it's as important. I think it can be helpful in an essay. You know, I did a business summer program at Michigan. Now I'm applying to Michigan for business. I can call out these specific professors in my essay. You know, when I worked with Professor so-and-so over the summer, I really admired her, you know, approach to X, Y, and Z thing. But generally, for less specialized programs than film, it is not necessarily a leg up to have done the school's summer program. But film is the exception, and NYU film in particular, if you're not doing their specific program for NYU or USC or any of those major film schools, New York Film Academy, and they have in person in New York and on the West Coast, but like I said, started to do virtual this past year, and that's a really great program for film specifically. Is that helpful?
Shannon, for families who may have a younger child that's a few years away, just kind of thinking ahead, can you talk a little bit more in depth about what you know with regard to the future of standardized testing? I know that COVID, there was some reprieve, so to speak, where a lot of schools didn't require it. Some said they're never going to require it again. There's lots of rumors flying. For families that might have multiple children looking at college over the next, few years, can you talk a little bit more specifically about the future of standardized test prep as you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, this year we're already seeing some testing come back, most not, but the Georgia system and Georgetown are some of the major ones where testing is coming back. And then Florida, it never left. I think that Georgetown and Georgia are actually great examples of the schools that I think we're going to be see testing come back a lot. I think for some of the smaller private schools, even the highly selective ones, you're going to see less of an emphasis on testing. I think we're certainly headed in that direction. For a school like Georgetown, which specifically in some of you in the DC area, this may be important, Georgetown loves tests. They want you to take as many as possible. They love standardized testing. They made students take 3 SAT subject tests before those were gotten rid of. They will probably require testing until they are no longer permitted to do so, or until they get a new dean of admissions. So Georgetown in particular, that's a school tests are going to be really important. And there are some schools like that where tests are just a major factor in their process, and it'll probably stay that way. The other schools that I think you're going to see bring testing back are those major state schools, like Georgia, maybe the Pennsylvania state schools. You're seeing these highly selective state schools get a huge influx of applications. So for instance, last cycle, Virginia Tech, one of our state schools here in Virginia, had a 39% increase in applications. Huge, massive increase, which in part was because they moved to the common application, but also was because of testing. So those flagship state schools, Georgia, North Carolina, Penn State, I think you will see testing come back because they just have such a high application volume that they really need that additional sort of measure to narrow their applicant pool a little bit, because it is just so large for some of those flagship state schools. So those are sort of the 2 places where I think you're really going to see testing come back when possible. And then I think smaller schools, private schools, you probably will see that drop.
If some schools have moved to something called like test optional, where if you've taken it, you can submit it. And then if you haven't, don't worry about it. How should families navigate that if that's going to continue to be a thing? Should they encourage their kids to take it? And are those scores reported to the schools or only if you give permission? I think I know the answer to some of these questions, but I think that might be helpful.
Yeah. My advice is to take the test if you can do so safely. Colleges will know, because it's sort of common knowledge, where these tests are being offered and where they're not. For instance, where I'm based in Fairfax County, if you're applying from a Fairfax County school, you will likely be applying to an admissions officer who knows that you had plenty of opportunities to take this test. And that's not true for everybody. So if you are in an area where you are being given plenty of opportunities to take a test, definitely take the test, prepare for the test, and take it. Overall, big picture, submitting test scores does seem to give students a slight edge in the process, in that the admissions rates for students who submitted test scores to test optional institutions are a little bit higher. Now, whether that's because the test scores themselves were the factor, or students who can prepare and take a test are generally in a better situation anyway. They're a more driven student. They're putting in more effort to the process. They're more likely to be admitted anyway. That's why they took the test and someone else didn't. Hard to say. But overall, I think it's important to take a test because to answer your second question, nobody has to see the test unless you want them to. If you take a test and you do terribly and you're not a good test taker, it's not reflective of your abilities, you can pretend it never happened. So unless there is a financial burden to it, which is very real for some people and should be taken into account, if there's not a financial burden, take the test. The worst thing that happens is you don't submit the test. So I think that would be sort of the answer to that question would be to prep for and take them.
Thanks, Shannon. I just wanted to go back up because there's a couple of different questions that I think would be great if you could touch on, even though we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
One is, how do you narrow from 3,000 colleges to the colleges that a student wants to go to? Yeah.
So I think this is a little bit of what we talked about at the beginning. I see in your question, can I expand at all on this? So I think identifying the factors that are most important to you. We call them the must-haves and the no ways. That's versus the would be nice and the don't love. So a must-have is something that a school has to have for you to want to attend. And a no way is something that if a school has that, I am not going. All girls school, not interested, whatever it is. Those are sort of your big key markers to narrow down. Then you have those lesser factors, those would be nices and those don't loves. And then you can say, okay, does this school have everything else that I love, but I can't bring a car to campus? Well, it's not a deal breaker. That's somewhere I'll consider. So that's kind of how I would start with the narrowing down. Geographic region can be really helpful, not only in terms of being close to home, but thinking about where you want to be later on. So for instance, I went to William and Mary. When I'm applying for jobs in DC, they know what that is. It usually makes a good impression. When I was in Los Angeles, people were like, where? What's that? So sort of thinking about where you want to be geographically can be a big factor for some people. But really, again, it is personal to you and the student, like what the factors are that matter to you. And then I see a question, is there a listing of schools and programs that place a high value on participating in a special summer program? I do not know that there's a list of those schools that exists. If you are working with an educational consultant, we can usually help you if there's something in particular you should be doing, but I am not aware of like a public list like that. And then to piggyback previous senior question, my senior cannot narrow down area of study.
I think we talked about that one. There's one left that I think you can answer in a minute. Do colleges discount an SAT score that was taken in August of junior year? If that's the only score I'm assuming that they have, or if they did badly, and then I'm interpreting Jody, so feel free to clarify. But if they did poorly on an August junior year test and they take the test and go up, okay, so it was a high score. She wants to know if they got a high score in August of junior year, should they take it again and see if they can do better over the next year?
It depends on what the score is. If the score is in line with your goals and in line with the schools that you're looking for, definitely good, great, you're done, you took the test. It doesn't matter that it was August 3rd junior year, they will not discount it. If you're taking practice tests and feeling like there's room for improvement, or you started working with a tutor and you're feeling like there's room for improvement, sure, take it again. If you don't do as well, you simply send that first high score. So it's really whether the student feels like there's room for improvement there. But otherwise you're set, and that's great. Having it done before junior year is awesome. And then I see the last question, internship in the Naval Academy. Yes, I do recommend college. I am biased. I am a college admissions consultant. The military academies have an extremely extensive process that has to start, I would say, sophomore year at the absolute latest, although we have helped a junior the summer before her junior year apply to military academies. It was crazy. We were hand delivering papers all over the state of Virginia. But yes, military academies are amazing schools. The application process is very difficult, and I'm happy to talk more offline. Tracy, if you want to shoot me an email about that, because too complex to go into in a minute.
So thank you, Shannon, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate this. I found it incredibly helpful, and I hope that everybody else did. I think if you're in this phase, have kids in this phase of life, this gives you an incredible insight. And I think that Shannon has great experience and does great work with kids. They do a lot of work also, not only outside of Virginia, but they do have a lot of experience with getting kids down into the different schools that we have in Virginia. That's great. And so they know a lot about that. If you have students that are interested in specifically in going to Virginia schools, I definitely recommend Shannon. But overall, as you've learned, I think that she's pretty knowledgeable and fantastic, and she's great to work with. So I want to say thank you so much to her for joining us and giving us her time. Her information to contact her is on the screen. If you lose it or don't have it, feel free to reach out to us. That's fine too. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join this month's Less Stressed Parenting call. So we always welcome feedback. Feel free to shoot us a note and let us know if there's something else that you're interested in hearing so that we can provide that in our future sessions. And I wish you guys all a great fall day, and we will look forward to meeting again next month.
Yes, Shannon, thank you very much. I know there's so many factors. I've learned so much today. I hear families talking about just personal factors. You're so right about that. Do I want to be close to family? Do I want to be far away from family? In Chicago, it's cold like 9 months out of the year. Do I need 4 seasons? So you're really right. You're right. It's absolutely personal. And thank you for all this helpful information. I assume grades are still really important for college admissions. And so if we can help anybody in any way in Texas or in the DC metro area, please let us know. And executive function skills are so important. I still think the biggest transition kids make is that transition from high school to college, really in their entire lives. So this was so rich with information. Shannon, thank you so much. Clearly this is not your first rodeo, and you know what you're doing. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed it. This is recorded, and so we should be getting some information out to everyone about how to view the recording shortly. But have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you guys so much.
Bye-bye.